A Monday of good news in the middle of a pandemic of horrible news. The good news is that the IHME COVID-19 forecast has been revised downward. We need fewer hospital beds, fewer IC units, fewer ventilators. The death toll peak has been lowered. However, in Europe, they are talking about opening up. Governments, according to the Financial Times, governments in France, Spain, Belgium, and Finland are among many countries that have set up expert committees to examine a gradual easing of stay-at-home orders. We don't have such a committee in the United States. Yesterday online, former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and Fox News' Dana Perino simultaneously suggested it. Great minds thinking alike. I'm joined now by Governor Scott Walker. Good morning, Governor. Where do we find you today?
I am safely at home in Wisconsin. Have been for a month, so I guess I was ahead of the curve.
How is the Walker family generally?
Everybody's good. You know, I spoke at CPAC, so I had a 2-week head start on everybody else because I had to be in self-quarantine after being exposed to one of the participants who tested positive. But my wife is back with me now, and we're all here, and our kids who are in their 20s are at a different location. They live on their own, and they're good as well. And we like everybody else, we FaceTime them a couple times a day, and my mom has been in self-quarantine for a month, so we're doing all right. Hope you're doing well.
Good. That's the Hewitt family to a T. Now, Governor, talk to us a little bit about what you and Dana talked about, and another task force apart from pandemic response that would focus on economic reopening.
Yeah, we got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Obviously, number one priority, health and safety of the American people has to be. In fact, actually, the longer this drags on the health side, the worse off it is for the economy. So first, everybody's got to do their part. Don't go out if you don't have to. Do all the things that CDC tells you to. But we've got to be planning for this transition. We can't just abruptly, if things go well on May 1st, wake up and everybody's back to work. There's got to be a logical transition. It's got to be something we thought out about. It's got to be acted on. And I wrote in the Washington Times about how I think there's a way to do it with what I call extreme caution, meaning you look at certain industries like manufacturing where people can be spread out, where you can close down break rooms and lunch rooms, where you can monitor entrance and exit from the facilities, where you can do a whole series of things, keep much of the administrative work. Those sorts of industries still can stay at home, but transition back into the economy. You can't do it the flip of a switch. There's got to be a plan, and you got to have a logical way of doing it.
Now, Governor, I set up this conversation by talking in the first segment with Rhett Rasmussen, who runs BestHotGrill.com in California, where he has kept manufacturing grills and gas logs and outdoor heaters by spacing his employees. They have 9 buildings over 4 acres, so it's a little bit easier testing their employees as they come in. But and they've managed to keep up about 3/4 of their business online at BestHotGrill.com. I imagine there are a lot of people who are eager to do that, but they are a little bit of they're going to need some encouragement from the government to do that, and some I think liability protection. Would you imagine liability protection for people getting back to work is going to be essential to a phase 4 if one emerges from the Congress?
Yeah, I do. I think we've got to get smart people thinking about all these different things. Part of what prompted my column was talking to one of my neighbors who's in that same boat, and we walked him through just on a personal, not just a policy level, all the things you talked about, bringing cleaning crews in, having a testing monitor, spacing people out, even in the bathroom, putting out signage that kept people from going in more than one at a time in the restrooms. All those sorts of things have got to be thought out. I think the same thing, even more so, is going to be true with retail locations eventually, where maybe there's even signage that people say this facility, this establishment follows these CDC requirements to transition back into employment. Got to do all those things. Liability is a part of it. One other key thing, Hugh, and this is something that Lindsey Graham talked about initially when the big bill passed, but we still got to do it, and that is dealing with unemployment compensation. I'm not saying people shouldn't get resources. Right now, things are crazy. They're wild. We got to get those checks out, get people money, get the economy back going again, get people to be able to pay their rent and their mortgage and their bills. But I think there's got to be a way the federal and the state governments need to work with the private sector and help people ease off of those higher benefits. Because remember, there's a lot of Americans who are going to make more under their unemployment. Not everybody, but many who will make more under unemployment than they make being employed. We've got to help them transition. And my suggestion is you don't have a benefits cliff. You ease people off during the time of this transition so there's an incentive to get back into the workforce.
Now, Governor, I got two specific questions for you because you've got so much experience, and I hope you end up on this task force. The first is many Americans, as you know, work two jobs, and they do so in order to put their kids through college, to pay for a home, to get a little bit of cushion built up in savings. If they get laid off from one, a lot of state employment insurance programs do not allow them to claim unemployment. I think that's wrong. What's the Wisconsin rule, and what you're thinking about this?
Well, I think it will be a barrier, not only in Wisconsin, but in a good chunk of states. I think these circumstances are extraordinary, and that's why I think we've got to come in, and it's got to be the federal and the state working together, because with the number of these changes, liability, unemployment insurance, other reforms, and it's not just unemployment, it's other benefits. We changed, for example, when I was governor, what I call the benefits cliff for people who were working but who found it was a disincentive to work more hours, or even in some cases to take a job in the first place, because if they had kids, their health insurance was covered better up until a certain income level. We allowed it to eliminate the benefits cliff and transition people off of public assistance. The same thing's got to be true here. Any barrier, whether it's multiple jobs, unemployment, loss of income, all those things have got to be, you've got to re-examine everything and find ways to provide incentives to get people back to work, because we open up the door. We put out the "we're open" sign, but if a good chunk of Americans find it's not in their financial interest to come back to work, we're going to have a big problem.
A second area where I see some federal leadership could be useful is in becoming a business interruption insurer of first resort and using America's existing insurance companies with their adjustment and their expertise. But to say, look, show us year over year revenue decline, or even January over April revenue decline, and we'll write you a check, because business interruption insurance, that's actually what we've got here. We've got the sort of event that normally businesses are insured for if it's a hurricane or a fire, but for which they are not insured, a medical emergency. What do you think about business interruption insurance from the federal government through the existing state insurance systems?
Well, I think it makes sense, and here's the reason why. Obviously, I'm not a big spender. I'm someone who's for years have talked about the need for a balanced budget amendment in the federal government. I got real concerns long-term about the size of the debt and feel like we'd be in a much better position if we weren't sitting on a $23.5 almost $1 trillion debt that'll be probably $30 trillion within the year. Having said all that, as a governor, you just alluded to this, as a governor, I saw not hurricanes, but many a tornado and flood and other disaster. And it was right for the state, the federal, and even the local governments to help those individuals, those homeowners, as well as those small businesses get back up on their feet again, particularly if the government came in during an emergency and shut parts of a city or region down. It only made sense that then there was federal assistance, there was state assistance, there was local assistance to cover the time. They were compensated for their loss of business. That's what we're experiencing. It's just not in a designated area. It's all over the country and clearly all over the world. We have to take care of what's happening in the United States, and it makes sense to use every asset we have to get people back to work.
Now, I'm going to talk about a bad idea, but a quick question. Have you spoken with the president, Governor Walker?
I have not. I've talked to Lindsey Graham. I've talked to the vice president. I've talked to others. I figure you can relate to this. I figured I'm not going out of my way to bug them at a time when obviously there's critical things going on. But I have, of late, last week, talked 2 or 3 times to Senator Graham about this, because this is obviously a passion of his, and talk to the vice president's team.
Well, I think a task force is great, and I think you ought to lead it myself. Now, here's the bad idea that's floating around is a lot of state pension funds have taken enormous hits in the market, which have made them appear even more insolvent than they were. Wisconsin has the most solvent pension fund in America. I believe that is the case, and it's still taken a hit. I am not opposed to making some of those losses good, provided there is attached to it a cap on the amount of budget of outlay that any individual. I don't think any retiree from any public employment job should ever make more than a colonel on active duty in the Army for 30 years or their equivalent in the Navy. I just do not believe in $300,000 pensions or $200,000 pensions. I just don't. And I wonder if you think there will be an opportunity in replenishing some of these state pension funds to reform them.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. In fact, before I was governor, the reason I became the Milwaukee County executive, the head of the million-some people in Milwaukee County, first Republican ever, was because of a pension scandal. And we came in precisely because of some of those numbers you talked about. In fact, some cases, they had an open-ended lump sum pension that gave people a payout of somewhere, in some cases, even up to $1 million. That's wrong. That's part of the reason why I came in and cleaned things up. And people, even in a Democrat-leaning county, elected someone like me. I think on pensions, on unemployment, and a whole series of other public programs that are out there, we, in return for the taxpayers, all of us are going to pay for fixing many of these things. We've got to demand that there's reform in place. Good example, Wisconsin. You mentioned our pensions. Not only do we have, since I've been governor, public employees making their portion of the contribution for the retirement, not the taxpayer picking up both. But the other thing we maintain, which other states and regions should look at, is we have a pension, but it's not traditional in the sense that there's a core, which is the base you get no matter what. But then on top of that, the annuitant, the retiree, participates in both the risk and the reward, just like people do with 401ks. That's part of the reason why we're where we're at, number one in the nation. Other systems should look at this so that the taxpayers aren't taking all the risk.
That's why phase 4, if it comes, and I'm so glad Mitch McConnell is going to have a veto over this, and Lindsey's involved in it, and I'd love some governors to be involved in it. There's got to be reform along with it. So how many people would be on a commission that works well? We have 30 seconds, Governor. What's the maximum number of participants to actually get something done?
I think the key is it depends on who those folks are, but I'd look at, somewhere 12 to 15 range. You could go a little bit higher depending on the quality of the folks. But and it's got to be across the board, public, private, Democrat, Republican. There's got to be a fair representation without being a quota system. But there's got to be a good mix of goodwill, well-intentioned people who just.
Do you need anyone from the media on there? I don't think so.
No, I think if you get small business, a couple different industries, and you get a couple key lawmakers from both chambers and both parties, and a few governors, and I would even say even local officials, because there's all these different nuances we just talked about, and you don't want to ignore any of them.
I think you're right. Governor Scott Walker, thank you for joining me at Scott Walker on Twitter.